Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's do a few more points on this report. One is, Kate, that I will say something nice about it, which is that President Biden calls for the passage of the Afghan Adjustment Act. And I think that's an important piece of legislation. I think he should probably do that more loudly and more prominently. There were reportedly thousands of Afghans who had helped U.S. forces. Some were evacuated during this retreat to the U.S. under humanitarian parole after they had been through security vetting, but they have no long-term solution. And so this bill in Congress, the Afghan Adjustment Act, would do more vetting of them and provide them a path to a green card. Kate, what do you make of the politics there? Or is there more investigation that's going to be happening on Capitol Hill over the Afghan evacuation?
Yeah, Kyle, on the visa point, I mean, the report goes out of its way to, again, blame Trump for not dedicating enough resources to the immigration system and as to blame that as why they have failed so spectacularly on this front. I mean, keep in mind that during the evacuation, you had groups of former U.S. military special operators trying to get their own people out. One of the more successful task force, Pineapple. These were sort of presented as, good stories in a dark situation, but they really underscore the failure of the U.S. government to get the people that helped us out of the country. And there's even dispute now about how many are left in the country that we need to get to the United States to safety from the Taliban. On the politics of the visa bill, to your point, we have not seen the president dedicate a lot of political capital to passing this bill. And I think that's largely because he doesn't want to talk about his failure in Afghanistan, again, dumping this report on a Thursday afternoon. I do think Congress could show a little initiative there and try to get that done. This report is going to be sent over to Congress. There's a much larger classified package, and this 12-page public document is sort of like I said, a loosely called report, an introduction to some of those materials. But even there, Kyle, we're hearing some murmurs from Republicans on the Hill that the administration basically is going to rescind these materials in sometime over the next month arbitrarily and basically try to make it so that Republicans can't look at them in full detail. So I think the onus is on Congress to continue to learn the lessons of this terrible moment in U.S. history and try to get straight whatever facts they can. And also that visa bill would be a good way for them to move the ball forward and end this limbo that those who helped us in Afghanistan are stuck in.
The other thing I wish President Biden would put more attention on is the medieval conditions that are now being reimposed in Afghanistan, especially on Afghan women. As of December, the Taliban had banned girls from attending elementary schools again. It had presided over the first public execution since it returned to power. The father of a murder victim carried out the death sentence in front of a crowd, shooting the killer. It has brought back public lashings. There was a public lashing in a sports stadium. This is a line from an Associated Press report. It says, social media invites for the 9 a.m. event went out to honorable scholars, mujahideen, elders, tribal leaders, and local people, unquote. And Kim, I get that the United States did not go into Afghanistan to right the world's wrongs, but there was tremendous progress made in the 2 decades that U.S. forces were there helping to keep the government and keep the peace. And just a little bit of recognition of the loss there, I think, is due from President Biden.
Absolutely. And to add to that list of things, let's not forget that so many Afghanis are simply starving to death because you had a Taliban come in utterly incapable of administering a government, and that has just ruined the economy. And so you have famine, starvation, and that's in addition to the human rights abuses that we are seeing now. You are right, Kyle. We did not go into Afghanistan to right those wrongs. We went in there because Afghanistan was harboring international terrorists and using the country as a base station by which to attack the United States. But you talk to any of the service members that were over there, this is something they remain very proud of, that in helping to rebuild Afghan society, they got rid of one of the most medieval regimes that had ever existed in modern times. And now that regime is back. And we're going to be seeing a lot more stories like this, a lot more incredible books about the tragedies and the horrors that are facing Afghanis. That seems to be something that Joe Biden cares very little about. Again, he had this almost monomaniacal focus on simply getting out of that country. We know from history, from the writings, that he never wanted to be there, was very dismissive of that war all along. And, this is not the look for a global leader. Again, you don't have to suggest that it was our mission to do this, but to lament what has been lost, to devote more time talking about Taliban excesses and Taliban medieval behavior is something he should be doing. But I agree with Kate. The reason he won't is he doesn't want anyone to remember those horrible scenes of that evacuation.
But it seems that they can't help but remember, and Kate, I'll make this the final point on Afghanistan, but if you look at the president's job approval rating in the Real Clear Politics average, it is remarkable that it starts out more popular than unpopular, and the X, where it crosses, is right smack dab in the middle of August 2021. And it looks like, there's some normal honeymoon wearing off, sliding going on in the president's first months in office. And then there's a pretty nice drop there amid the Afghan invasion. And maybe I'm overreading this, Kate, but it seems to me that maybe there were some people who that was the moment that they said, hang on, this was not the steady hand on the tiller that I thought I was getting.
Right, Kyla. The adults are back in charge. I think many Americans concluded that wasn't the case as they watched these images. And it transcended across what people thought about whether the mission had drifted or how many troops we could keep in the country. These scenes that we saw in Afghanistan just really did, I think, elicit a broad response. And I would call it, Kyle, one of the president's great underrated political liabilities. If you look at the chart that you described of his approval rating, he never recovers from this hit to his approval. Now, maybe that was just the initial fall off to his approval after he came into office only 8 months before, but I don't think so. I think there's something more going on here, that if a Republican candidate could talk about cogently why America's role in the world matters, it could be potent with moderate voters.
Finally, what about the economic numbers? The Labor Department reported on Friday that in March, employers added 236,000 net workers. That is a reasonably good gain, and yet is also the smallest in more than 2 years. And so the Journal's headline on this says it shows hiring gradually cooling. Kim, what do you make of this when we're in this odd economy where the Fed has been raising rates and the Fed is not clear when it's going to stop doing that? And we've had these financial panics in a couple of banks. So people are worried about the stability of the financial system, perhaps. How do you read this economic data?
Yeah, it certainly seems as though whether it's the Fed, whether it's fear, whether it's people who are running out of COVID cash, because we also saw, which was interesting, more people now going to work, but the economy is cooling. We've obviously seen some big layoffs, especially among tech companies and others. But what this suggests too is that companies overall are pulling back, perhaps not being as ambitious in some of its growth ideas. And again, more people coming back to work. This has had effects that also, I think, is feeding into these numbers. But for instance, wage growth grew at about 4.2%. That's still pretty healthy, but it's the smallest from the middle of 2021 in terms of amounts. Now, this on the one hand may help a little bit with inflation if there are more workers out there and businesses are not having to offer huge amounts to get them to come work or more benefits. This kind of puts a downward pressure on inflation and that whole wage price cycle that we talk about. On the other hand, it's not great for workers, meaning that we still have some pretty high inflation. And as those wage growth numbers slow, it means they're going to have a harder time stretching their paychecks to cover for growing prices in goods. Overall, I think what this suggests is that the Fed can look and maybe feel a little bit more confident that it can continue to sort of raise some rates to try to get inflation under control. That would be my guess. But you watch for the business community and Democrats in Congress to begin yelling even more that this is starting to hurt too much and that it needs to let up.
Well, the wage figure is the one that Fed Chair Jerome Powell has his eye on. Again, it was average hourly earnings up 4.2% last month compared with a year earlier. And I would point to one of the things that Powell said when he testified before Congress in March. He said that wage gains remain above what is consistent with 2% inflation and current trends in productivity, unquote. And so, Kate, that suggests to me that maybe the Fed is not done yet. Even if we have a jobs market that, as the Journal headline suggests, is gradually cooling, that maybe that won't be enough for the Federal Reserve as it's looking at these wage changes and whether this is really consistent with the kind of inflation target that they're intending to hit. And Kate, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I was going to give the last word on the labor market and the cooling and how slow it is. One story I've been watching pretty closely, Kyle, is, we're unwinding some of the emergency benefit programs that were initiated during COVID. And that has released some stories about how we're kicking people off the rolls and how this is a big problem when in reality we're just going back to pre-COVID eligibility rules. This is not as strong as the labor market has been in past reports, but it's not been the fall off that some have expected. And so I think this is an interesting sign. It has still remained somewhat durable. And so I think hopefully too, we see some of those benefit programs start to be reined in, and which should also have a salutary effect on the labor market.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition.